My name is Kelsey. I'm the Clinical School and Community Program Coordinator for Willow House. I work almost exclusively with schools who are grieving. And as you can imagine, Willow House has been very, very busy since March, really since the start of the quarantine. And we're happy to provide some comfort during this really hard time. I want to preface all of this by saying that what is happening right now in the world is something just so unprecedented and so unfathomable that it's leaving a lot of us in shock, not to mention the stress and the worry that we have over finances, our health, the health of our loved ones. And the other challenge, of course, is that, we don't have a published roadmap on how to properly kind of handle this. But we're doing the best that we can. I really believe that. And, for those who are grieving, the holidays can be very unfamiliar terrain. Whether you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, this time is filled often with those fond remembrance of loved ones, who are on your mind, yet absent from your rituals and your traditions, physically speaking. And this holiday season can be hard for those who have suffered a loss or are grieving a loss, whether that was this year or years ago. And then, of course, these feelings of grief and stress can be and have been enhanced by COVID-19. So we're grieving many different losses all at once. And living in COVID-19, it's a living loss, right? It's happening right now. We're living in this loss. And what Lauren and I want to be able to do is not necessarily preach at you and say, this is what you need to do, this is the best way to do it. We're wanting to provide some practical insight, tools, ideas for how we can kind of cope through the holidays during this really difficult time period. How to cope with the holidays, but also how to cope with that loneliness that we might feel, that sense of isolation that we might feel. I know I'm feeling that. And what I want to, actually, before I even do anything, Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself, or would you like to introduce yourself when you start your section of the PowerPoint?
I'll introduce myself right now really quick. So yes, I'm Lauren Wozniak. I'm the program director at Willow House, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a registered art therapist. So also very happy to be with you all. And Kelsey and I will kind of be alternating throughout this presentation, sharing our info. So thanks,
Lauren. So what I want to do first, and we're going to use chat for this if you don't mind, is actually let me get through what Willow House is about first, and then we'll do some interactive stuff. So if you don't know who Willow House is, what we do, we're pretty much exclusively grief and loss. So we do have peer support groups, and we're able to support grieving family members as young as preschool, up until age 100 and over. And we provide services for those who have lost partners and spouses, as well as children and siblings. And we also have a special group that's specifically for those who lost a loved one to suicide. And if anyone in here is wanting to learn a little bit more about how to get involved, how to become part of the Willow House family, Lauren and I were going to share our information at the end of this. All right. So this is what I want to use that chat feature for. So this is just an opportunity for all of us to just kind of share collectively. I'm asking you to kind of be vulnerable here. But when we do so, with that understanding that all of us are going to be vulnerable here. So one of the questions that I want to ask each of you first, and feel free to put in the chat, you don't have to, but this is a way for me and Lauren to kind of gauge who's in the room with us. I want to know first, what words describe the impact this pandemic has had on you? And I'm going to look in the chat and have it up. So what words describe, so I'm reading isolation and fear. Yeah, fear of the unknown, feeling alone, absolutely. Overwhelmed, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Helpless, I appreciate you saying that, Sam. Yes, exhausted, feeling out of control, no control, or having less control. Just uncertainty about the future, when this is going to be over, right? Lonely, absolutely. Yes, and I appreciate relief. For some, this is, this isn't a welcome time to kind of not having to interact with the world. Yeah, sheltering in place, exhausted, fearful, isolated, absolutely. So what I'm hearing, and the theme of what I'm hearing is, yeah, boredom for sure, is we have so much in common with each other, don't we? So much in common with each other, right? And it sounds like that we're also experiencing somatic reactions, emotional reactions, as you see here, spiritual reactions. Has your faith become stronger? Has your faith been shaken? Right? Somewhere in the middle. But I want to know too, this second question, because this is so pertinent to what Lauren and I are going to talk about, is what are your concerns? Like, what's on your mind? What's a question that you've been asking? What's something that you've been wondering about that kind of keeps you up at night, right? So my concerns about the holiday, it's pretty vague. I don't know what to do. I'm still deciding. I don't know. What are your concerns? Is it traveling? Is it concerns about staying at home? Is it concerns about spending the holidays alone or with just one person physically? Yeah, how our families are going to be able to celebrate safely. Yeah, Reverend Perkins says having guilt about potential travel. Yeah, absolutely. Or guilt from not going. Yeah, and some of us have loved ones who are in hospice care, who are sick, who are dying. Yeah, absolutely. So we all have different concerns about how we're going to kind of handle this. Absolutely. Yeah, is it wrong that I'm okay with not celebrating? No, definitely not. And Lauren and I are going to talk about that. Absolutely. And I want all of you to know that at the end of the day, when it comes to coping with holidays, you have to do what's best for you and what's going to feel good and what's going to be a good decision for you and your family. So I appreciate you guys sharing this, because this gives me and Lauren some time to kind of see who's in the room with us. It's hard what we're going through. Which brings me to kind of our first section. Is we're definitely going to talk about holidays, but I want to talk a little bit more about this loneliness and isolation that we're feeling. And if you are going to have to be spending the holidays alone, or just with one other person, let's say. So I want to first give some voice to the fact that things are different now. They are. As human beings, one of the big things is that we're used to physical touch, physically being together, right? We are social creatures. We bond through hugging, through kissing, through holding hands, right? Through hugs. This is how we co-regulate and communicate with other people, right? So it goes against our innate nature, right? We're not used to this remote contact. This isn't what we're used to. Zoom is great and all, but a lot of people are like, but it's not the real thing. Yes, exactly. And we're also living in this time of collective trauma, but also collective grief. We're not only grieving for the loss of our loved ones, either due to COVID-19 or otherwise. Losses that were many years ago were actively happening right now. But we might also be grieving aspects of ourselves. We might be grieving loss of security, loss of safety, loss of meaning. And significant life-changing events such as a pandemic can cause us to feel deeply vulnerable and unsafe, right? Because the world that we knew looks different and it feels different. And so part of our grieving process with this collective grief that we're in is kind of rebuilding these assumptions and accommodating and assimilating what has been changed and how we have changed. We have changed on a fundamental level, right? And when we think of loss, again, as I mentioned, we think of past memories, something that happened long ago, but with the situation that we're in, we're living that loss every day, right? We're living that loss. And I can't remember who said it. I think it was Pastor Kathy, if I'm not mistaken, about, you had mentioned right in the beginning that we might be grieving so many different things, and that little voice in our head that says, you don't have a right to grieve that. For instance, I'm grieving the fact that I, can't go to my favorite restaurant with my friends. And I feel that, right? That's something that I think about, right? Because that was our thing, trivia night, right? On Wednesday nights. And that little voice in my head, we call it disenfranchised grief, right? It's that little voice in your head that says, you don't have a right to grieve because the family down the street just lost everything, right? Or a young boy that's grieving the fact that he can't go to school, knowing full well, again, that a family down the street has had just lost the patriarch of their family, right? This is disenfranchised grief. And so what Lauren and I want to say to all of you is that if you're hurting, if you're longing, you are grieving and you have a right to grieve. There's no hierarchy to grief. We're grieving also secondary losses. What I mean by that is, let's say we have a loved one who dies. And sometimes there's this like little domino effect that happens, right? We lose our loved one, but then we might lose the person who was our best friend. We might lose our confidant. We might lose our go-to person for everything. We can lose our sense of faith. We can lose confidence in ourselves. We can lose a sense that our dreams aren't going to come true, right? We lose pieces of our identity. These are just some of the things that we might kind of grieve. Loss of self, right? Who am I in the wake of this loss, right? One of the first clients that I ever had, I was working in hospice. That was my first job in counseling. And a young mother had lost her only child. And she looked at me and says, Kelsey, am I still a mom? I was like, of course you're still a mom. Of course you're still a mommy. You will always be a mommy to your baby, right? But these are things that we grieve, right? We can lose that sense of security, right? The world just doesn't seem as safe, right? And loss of meaning as well. And again, part of that grieving process is building back up that sense of meaning. The act of meaning making can be a part of the grieving process. So rest assured, everyone, I'm not going to go through all of these items, but I want to point out just some here that we can kind of wrap our heads around and think about. First, I want us to acknowledge that the distress that we're feeling, anxiety, stress, worry, overwhelm, maybe that a sense of panic that's like ebbing and flowing, this is a survival response. Your bodies are working overtime to keep you safe. This is natural and it's pretty expected, right? It's that fight or flight, right? The body is prepping you to keep you safe, right? So we can acknowledge that this is a normal human response, right? We communicate to co-regulate. So we don't just communicate to exchange information with each other. We communicate to calm on our nervous systems. For instance, if I look at Lauren and I'm like, Lauren, it is so great to see you today. Your smile warms me up, right? I can sense that Lauren's stress response is starting to lower. She feels invited, right? We're regulating with each other. I'm tapping into her bodily cues and hers to mine, right? We call it or activating our social engagement muscles, our voice, right? Our eye contact. And we can do this over Zoom. We can do this over the phone, right? Do something out of the ordinary. So I was talking to a friend who's living alone on how they're coping with everything. And I was surprised and happy to hear how they're doing. And she gave me some of the best advice that I've heard in a long time with this pandemic. She's like, I used to like to go out on the weekends, go dancing. And she's like, every couple of Fridays in a row, I put on my best outfit, I put on my favorite music, and I have my own Friday night dance party by myself. And she's like, it doesn't matter if I feel silly because all bets are off. It's 2020. There's no rules anymore, right? And you got to do what you got to do. And if that's having your own little dance party with yourself, then go ahead and do it, right? One other thing on here that I really want to stress too is I call it befriending the experience of virtual connection. I could have very easily, and don't worry, this wasn't what happened, but I could have very easily come onto the Zoom call and said, oh boy, here we go again, another Zoom meeting, right? I could have done that. But I said to myself, this is the reality that I'm living with, Kelsey, and I'm going to make the best of it. I'm going to be engaged. I'm going to tune in, and I'm going to throw myself into this presentation, right? Because this is what I have. This is how we have to do things right now, right? So befriending this experience that we're in, it's an act of radical acceptance. We don't have to like it, but we can accept it, right? That gives us some control in this situation. And if you're spending the holidays alone, I want to give some voice to this too, because this is reality for a lot of us, maybe in this room, that after the death of a loved one, sometimes we find ourselves facing the holidays and other important events by ourselves, right, for a variety of reasons. And on top of that, we're self-quarantining, right? So we know that for many people, sometimes spending the holidays isn't really a choice, right? Especially right now. And it can be hard to get through it. What I want that person to know, if this is you, that you're not alone. And it's easy to feel that we're the only ones who are struggling or hurting or having to kind of downsize this holiday season. And it can be oddly comforting to remember just how many people there are in the same boat. And let's be real. This will probably be a tough holiday season for many of us, if not all of us, right? And if you're spending any of it alone, acknowledge things will probably just not be very easy. And then cut yourself some slack. This holiday won't look like holidays that happened before or like the Hallmark movies. And don't get me wrong, I love Hallmark movies just as much as the next person, right? But reminding ourselves that just because your holiday doesn't look ideal right now doesn't mean that there can't be moments of peace and comfort and tranquility and joy and reassurance. And my last thing that I want to say in this section is I want you to think about what you want to do. Whether it's watching movies, music you want to listen to, books you want to read, projects that you want to do, things you want to bake, doesn't matter. Decide what is pleasant and decide what a pleasant and a peaceful day looks like for you.
Thanks, Kelsey. So I'm going to step in here as we talk about grief, guilt, and regret during this time of the pandemic. And I already got to see a little bit of this insight from all of you as you shared. So guilt and regret can come in many forms right now. These are just a handful of them, but not being able to see our people, whether that's family or friends or coworkers, knowing that, feeling guilty that our person has died, but that we are still here. Feeling guilty about feeling blah or just indifferent about what's going on right now. The reasons that we list all these guilty feelings is to validate them and to say that it is okay if you are feeling like you don't want to celebrate the holidays right now, or it's okay if you're feeling like, just making it day by day. There can have that regret of letting a favorite holiday pass you by. There can be so much pressure put on, the perfect holiday, the perfect, picture of your dinner table. But just knowing that it's okay to let different pieces of your specific holidays, to let those pieces go in order to save and harness your energy for the moments that you do want to continue celebrating this year. I think another big one is if any of you have kids or grandkids, just again, not being able to present that specific, best, perfect holiday to our loved ones can feel really overwhelming and can definitely lead to some feelings of guiltiness for that. There can be things along with finances, maybe feeling guilty that you can't afford a certain gift for a person, or to buy yourself, a favorite gift. Maybe for some people buying gifts for themselves is kind of their own self-care, but just with any financial changes, this can be another stressor. And then there's, feeling just too raw if we have lost someone. Those moments of just, not having the energy, not having the oomph and the gusto and the holiday spirit. with the lack of those feelings, it can again lead to just guiltiness of just not feeling how you normally would, or what a typical holiday season would look like for you. Kelsey, you can go to the next one. And so when thinking about, I'm also looking at 2 screens, just so you know, but when you're thinking about responding to these specific feelings, so what is it? What can we do to kind of help ourselves through these difficult emotions? Kelsey mentioned this a little bit as well, but just giving yourself grace this holiday season. This is something none of us have experienced before. Even if you have experienced a holiday without a person who has died, we are still within this pandemic. It's a brand new layer. It's a brand new experience for everybody. So just taking those deep breaths along the way and knowing that this is going to be different, and to give yourself cutting that slack. It's going to be really important not to compare. And for this, kind of thinking about it in 2 different ways. We don't want to compare our holidays to our own previous holidays, what happened in the past, because again, this pandemic has changed everything. It's also important not to compare to your neighbors or things you see online and social media, to see what other people are doing during this time. I think about the movie where, they look across the street and the neighbors have all those string lights up, the house is beautiful, and then you over here maybe just have, a couple of simple candles in the window, something like that. But it's important to know that just because what you see across the street and they're shining huge, gorgeous lights and sculptures, doesn't mean that they're having a better, holiday season than you. They might also be very well struggling. And so it's just keeping that mindset of not comparing what's happening from you or your neighbors or your other family, especially online. In this time of social media is huge right now during the pandemic, as it's a way to connect with people, but it's also a way to only see snippets of what people are experiencing right now. And so also not thinking about, or if you may be thinking that somebody is going to be disappointed in you, or disappointed that you can't fulfill what the expectations might be, it's good to know to kind of take a step back and reassess, but know that people are probably not as disappointed in you as you may think. We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to have this great holiday season. And most of the time, each family, each person is, kind of centering and focusing on themselves at the moment. So knowing that, I bet most likely people are not disappointed or judging you for not being able to have that certain energy or that specific colored tree up this year. And also knowing that there is going to be another holiday. There will be more to come in the future. Again, they may look different. They still may not be exactly what we've expected or experienced in the past, but just know that if this year you want to have a laid back, relaxed, totally different holiday, now is the time to allow that to happen, and know that there can be next year to add in another tradition. And then this last piece, I can't take credit for the Grinch aspect, but just from doing some different research on all of the different holiday items, one of the articles that I loved, they put this in here, that you're not a Grinch because you're not participating. We all know the story of the Grinch where he just, doesn't want to celebrate his holiday. So people, they call him the Grinch, and know that this is okay. If you don't want to be participating, if you want to change up your rituals, nobody's going to look down on you for that. At least they shouldn't, and I would hope that they wouldn't if they are in your support systems.
And I want to talk a little bit about some of these practical plans, right? And we're including this because some of us like to plan ahead. Some of us don't. But looking back in my time working in the grief and loss sphere, one of the big questions that I usually have is like, what do I do? What could I do? More of that. What can I do? And that's where Lauren and I want to provide some insight. And again, this isn't saying that you have to do all these things. It's nuggets that you can chew on with you and your family or by yourself, right? And planning ahead can be very relieving, of course, because, if it doesn't necessarily protect us against the inevitability that it will be difficult. However, but by thinking about elements of the holiday celebration that might be the hardest for you, you can perhaps minimize some of the stress and lessen the likelihood that you're going to be caught off guard by pretty difficult situations. So first, just a couple of these is I would encourage you to think about who you want to be or who you will be spending your holidays with, virtually, in person. Is it just going to be you and your partner? Is it going to be you and your best friend? Do you want to plan this big Zoom party with your extended family? Think about who you want to plan with, because oftentimes these individuals are coping with the same loss that you are, right? And it can be helpful to even call a family meeting, right, to kind of hash out these details. And when you do the planning, if you decide to do this, Lauren and I can't stress this enough, include the kiddos, include the grandkids. Kids have just the most marvelous ideas. Kids are so much more creative than me. And I look to kids on how to be creative around this time of the year. They're so wise and so imaginative, and then they'll feel like they're a part of something really grand. Think about this notion of tradition, right? What does tradition mean to you? Identify the rituals and the traditions that might be the hardest for you. For instance, is decorating the tree something that you and your loved one did together? Or is baking, your grandmother's recipe for her famous apple pies? Do you know if that's going to be something that's going to be really hard this year? Right? These are just examples, of course, right? But brainstorm ways to make these elements of the holiday maybe a little bit easier, whatever that might look like. And as Lauren kind of mentioned, that when it comes to any kind of tradition or ritual, you can change it or you can skip it, right, until next year. You have options. You have options. And the roles that the family plays is really important and something that I want to give voice to. That when a loved one dies, the roles in the family can change pretty. We step into roles where we take on new responsibilities, especially, and we see this during holiday times as well. But consider and talk about the role that you and your family and friends will take this year. Who's going to plan these big Zoom meetings? Who's going to cook the holiday meals? Who's going to help you with shopping, right? Making sure that these roles and responsibilities are not falling too heavily on you or not falling too heavily on just one person. And when I talk about these healthy habits, I'm not saying to deprive yourself of your favorite holiday treats, because that's my favorite part, one of my favorite parts, right? And giving yourself some grace, right? But rather, in times of immense stress, we do ourselves great honor and service by adhering to what we know works for us. So if you know that you feel your best when you get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, maybe consider that. Or if you know you feel your best when you go out for daily walks, right? Or you stretch, or you meditate, right? The holidays can be a great time to enhance these things, especially if we know that we're good for us. And lastly, I cannot stress enough the importance of taking breaks. I literally mean being like, okay, I gotta take a break. I gotta go out in the backyard. I gotta go for a walk. I'll be back in 5-10 minutes, but giving yourself these breaks, right? It's okay to dip out, as I say, right? I like to say I need a grief moment, right? That's just something that I use, but I need a grief moment. And if you feel comfortable in your family, your group of friends, you can share with that vocabulary with them. Like, if you see me kind of step out, just know I'm taking a grief break and I'm going to be okay and I'm going to come back, right? Negotiate some of these things within the family so that you're kind of on the same playing field, right? They know the language of grief, if you will, your language of grief as best as they can. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lauren, who's going to talk about these new perspectives on old traditions, which I'm sure is on a lot of our minds.
Sorry about that. I want to read this definition to you guys because I think it's so profound at this time. Tradition and ritual are things you do recurrently, but they are not routine. These are not automatic actions like buckling your seatbelt or brushing your teeth. They are the chosen and deliberate threads that bind you and your loved ones together. Your traditions and rituals were built with meaning and purpose, and they provide participants with a sense of identity, comfort, and security. The meaning of ritual is what makes it so important. And I love this quote. It's so even eye-opening to me as I look through my family's traditions. It's not so much about, we have to do this, otherwise this is gonna, we're not gonna have our best Christmas, but it's really thinking about, why are we doing this? Why are these traditions so important? Why has this become a ritual within our family and within our, small culture? Thinking about your community or, family, community, church, all the way outwards. Why is it? What is it that makes it so important? So I just want you to ponder on that. Kelsey, you can go ahead to the next slide. So then when looking at new perspectives, it's important to, as we think about our traditions, kind of take an eye to have this new perspective on what it is that we always do, or what feels normal and natural to us to do every single year around the holidays. But this information can also exist outside of just the holidays. This can exist with our daily routines, going to work, or maybe that has changed and now we are working from home. When we lose someone that's really important to us, it shifts everything. So thinking about some of these different perspectives here. So your person has died, and so that just inevitably means that times are different. Grief is all about staying connected with this person and adapting to the change of life without them. And so just, reminding yourself that things are going to be different. Things can't go back to the way that they were. So it's just an important mindset. They're going to be changed. And so I'll talk a little bit more too about what do we do with this change. So this time of COVID is really a time to find meaning within our traditions. So another piece of quote that I read that I really love is, when you engage in ritual solely because it's the way things have been, and to no one's benefit, it begins to unravel and turn into something meaningless and obligatory. So that's, again, just thinking about, we don't have to do rituals if it's just, something to check off the list. We want to make sure that it still has meaning, it's still special to you and to your families. So knowing that this time of COVID is a perfect time to throw out whatever, traditions that you don't like, whatever traditions and rituals that don't serve you anymore. We want to make sure that we are saving our energy for what's the most meaningful. I want to point out that some small traditions are just as important as the big traditions. So like, it could be eating your favorite holiday cookie instead of, gathering largely at your local mall where they light up the trees. My town does that. I don't know about you guys, but so like knowing that it's okay just to stick with some small things that might bring you comfort instead of the really large grand gestures. And knowing that change is okay. This change also does not have to be permanent though. If we change it this year during COVID, you can go back to your original tradition, maybe next year. So just knowing that we can allow something different, but that it doesn't always have to stick around if we don't like the way that it turned out. And then again, just focusing on the meanings and what are our values? What do we want to spend our energy on? All right, Kelsey, next. So now we're going to take a look at how can we continue to memorialize family members and rituals during this time? Go to the next one. Thank you. So when we talk about continuing bonds, this means that when a person that we love dies, our relationship with that person never ends. Even though their physical presence is no longer here, we can still connect with them in so many different ways. And so some of these ideas that you see on the screen here are just some ideas to kind of get you started if you haven't taken the time to find new ways to connect to your person. If you have the ability to watch home videos, or a lot of people have smartphones nowadays, just pictures, videos that are on there. My family, we still have, little tiny recording tapes that we have to plug into the camera, find all the adapters to hook it up to the TV to eventually watch. But those memories are so special that we take the time to figure out all those cables and watch them. One of my favorites and one of the most simple things is just lighting a candle in honor of your person. Perhaps you pick a candle out that has your person's favorite scent, or a scent that reminds you of them. I actually have right here, my sister made this for me. My mom passed away several years ago, but she made me a candle with a custom label on here. So you can do really special things. There's lots of ways to personalize things. Maybe it's a picture of your person on a candle, and you light that each day of your holiday celebration or on a daily basis. I love the idea of specific decorations as well. This could be pulling out things you have in your basement or your attic that maybe you haven't put out in a long time. This could be, maybe you have the feeling like you just want to get all new decorations and just kind of start fresh. That's okay too. It is also okay to not put up decorations if that's where your heart is feeling right now. I recently saw someone who has lost their dad, and she wanted to find these plastic candies that go on the tree. It's like a garland, they're full of glitter, and she was able to find them on eBay and was just so happy that she had found these pieces. And for her, that was really meaningful for her to put up a decoration that she had shared with her dad and her family years ago. So you can be really creative. Even making your own decorations can be a lot of fun. Taking a trip, I know I have that on there, but a little bit iffy at this moment. But if you're able to, even maybe it's a trip to your local forest preserve, maybe it's just some fresh new space for a little bit that feels safe to you, that maybe feels special to your person, can be really worthwhile. There's also things like volunteering your time to an organization that feels really meaningful to you. There are ways to volunteer right now through the computer. And also I love the idea of sending out cards to people who might really need them and maybe won't receive cards on their own. I'm thinking about like the military, or children in foster care, or just spreading that joy in small ways can also be a way to honor your person that you've lost. Go to the next one. And so I wanted to also touch base on food and meals, because I know that this can be a huge piece of holiday rituals. Something that is very common to do within a family can be to set a place for your person at the dinner table. For some people, it might feel a little too jarring and too triggering to have that open seat and open plate where your person may have sat. But for some people, it does bring comfort, and it can be a good physical reminder of your loved one. And it allows for whatever it is that you believe in, for their soul, their spirit, to maybe be with you at that dinner table. I think also offering the ideas of potluck, maybe if you do have the chance to be with family, even if it's just a small group of you, perhaps each person makes a dish that is your person's favorite, or even just making a dish in general and sharing can really take off some of the stress if you're usually the sole leader of your party. And then I also think that, again, continuing those bonds, so that makes me think of memories of holidays past, perhaps a special dedicated place for people to put down memories of the person, stories from past holidays, favorite gifts they may have received from their person, whether it's a photo book or a journal, maybe it's a canvas and you want to end up hanging it up later. You can be creative with how you want to share with each other. Say we're doing this virtually and getting together with family online. sharing ideas in the chat, or maybe it's making a Word doc and just everybody gets the chance to kind of type in or email different stories, collecting all those stories into one place and sharing them with the family. It can become a really nice little book of memories. All right, Kelsey, next one. Great. And then I wanted to touch on gifts and how this might be a way to continue bonds with your person that you've lost. For some people, gift giving is their love language, and they just really enjoy the excitement or the surprise of giving a gift. But some meaningful things that you might be able to do this year, if you still have possessions from your loved one, and it feels meaningful for you to give away to other family members, that could be something that you do. Perhaps it's, your husband's coziest, well, I wouldn't give away the coziest one, but maybe it's a flannel that they wore. You want to hand it down to the granddaughter. Things like that can be really meaningful just to have a tangible item from their person. You can donate to a cause. You can still buy a gift for this person who's no longer here, but then you can decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to donate that gift? Do you want to give it away to somebody else? Do you want to just keep it for yourself if that feels right? And then I actually did this last year with my family, is that we made ornaments all together after dinner. And we all talked about my mom and shared ideas and memories past, and put them onto little wooden ornaments, and we each, have it now for this year to hang up on our trees. So again, whatever feels right for you, there's no right or wrong way to honor your person and to stay connected with them through this time. So these are just a couple ideas here. All right, Kelsey. And so just kind of going along with what I've just shared with you, I loved this idea of the memory tablecloth you can see in the picture. Again, if you have the chance to come together with everyone, you can put down, whether it's cloth or any type of material, but they make cloth markers. People can write down names, words, quotes, stories, anything that they'd like in honor of the person who has died. Or it can even just be, a time of gratitude. If there hasn't been a death in the family, but we are all feeling this stress right now during the pandemic, it can just be a place to share positivity, to share gratitude with each other. Kelsey mentioned as well, music is a great way to continue honoring people, a great way just to have a stress reliever. Listen to your favorite tunes, dance if you want to. Just sit and close your eyes if that feels best too. I loved this idea of a secret signal. Maybe if it's with, just someone you're very close with, but maybe you tug your ear or it's like a scratch on the head, but this signal means I'm thinking of this person. I'm thinking of you. I'm thinking about, or maybe I'm feeling a little upset right now. So just, there's creative ways as well to share our emotions, to share our bonds with the people that are there in a way that is just a little bit more secretive or more, internal. A few other, new traditions. Maybe it's bringing in blessings into your meal, sharing stories around the table. Again, gratitude is a really big piece. Different decorations. And then one last idea, thinking about regrets and guilts. Perhaps it's having a very safe and small fire, but being able to put those regrets written down on paper, put them in the fire, discuss how that process feels for you, to kind of have a physical representation of letting go what you might be holding on to this holiday season. All right, Kelsey, you can go to the next.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up this presentation with just a few other things that I want to share that, again, touches upon our spirit, our soul. We mentioned that we don't just bond through language, We bond through music, we bond through food, as Lauren said, we bond through dreams, we bond through prayer, intuitive knowing, our senses. And now let's say that the only thing that you want to do is give your daughter a hug, right? That's the one thing that you want this Christmas, but maybe you can't do that. My mom visited a couple weeks ago and we were far apart. And she's like, Kelsey, I want to hug you. And she's like, and I was like, okay, let's do it. What we did is we closed our eyes and I imagined what it was like to be held by my mom. And I imagined her arms around me. I imagined her perfume. I imagined what her hair would be like against my cheek. And it felt so real. And she was doing the same thing, right? And we opened her eyes and I said, Mom, I feel you. And she's like, I feel you too. So we can bond through these senses. We can bond through these images that we have in our memories. And when it comes to, I call it stories of endurance. What we're living through right now is not easy. And after this, at the end of this presentation, you still might be wondering, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's okay. Right? I'm still feeling sad. Of course. Yeah. Honor that. Honor that. And I think about how difficult this time is. And I think about the people that came before me. Maybe the people that came before you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-great-great-great-great-parents, right? Going all down the line. And there are stories that I hearken to when I feel so alone and isolated, right? These are stories that were written by elders, right? The stories of my father and mother give me the confidence that the pandemic situation now is not the worst. That was what this one individual said. Another said, as I think back to my childhood, I can only think of it as a happy time. Back then, the people lived more together. Neighbors were there, and all adults were very caring of all children. We were looked after and protected by everybody because the children were the only future the people in the war had got. And this person had lived through World War II as a young person. I think of my grandfather, who was one of 8 and had to take care of his siblings in 1929 when the stock market crashed. And he was 11 years old in charge of 7 other siblings. And it's not meant to diminish what we're going through. Quite opposite, it's meant to strengthen us. My grandmother died during Christmas, and Christmas time is a really hard time for me. And a question that I ask myself is, if my grandmother was looking at me through her loving eyes, what would she see in me? What wisdom and advice would my grandmother give me right now? Right? These are stories of endurance that can remind us that we come from so much. And if you are particularly upset about the situation of the pandemic, you can write a letter to Corona and be like, I don't like you, coronavirus, first of all. You have ruined a lot of things. And I love this. This is a letter that was written by a bunch of nurses, first, essential responders, or essential workers, I should say. And they had told coronavirus, I hope you go away and never come back, right? But in this letter, they say, but we learned a lot from you. We learned a lot from this experience. We become stronger because of it. We have found comfort in our solidarity. We have learned that there is meaning even in suffering. And I want to end this slide with just some things for us to think about, that whatever, and I would encourage you to think about your own. Right? But this season, I will. What are you going to do? Maybe this season, you are going to cut yourself some slack. That's something that you're going to do. Maybe it's remembering that traditions can ebb and they flow. They're not rigid. They don't have to be rigid. Maybe looking for those small moments of comfort, even if it's just for a minute, even if it's taking a cleansing breath in through the nose and out the mouth. And if that's all you can manage to do in that moment, that is okay. That is okay. And not getting all wrapped up in what other people are doing and what other people think, right? Your grief is your own. and staying connected as we can, right? If you need to do that, right? This is about assessing your needs and allowing yourself to ebb and flow from, I want to talk to people, but now I don't, and going back and forth and allowing yourself to oscillate between those things, finding those comfort and those memories in our past, those stories of endurance. And maybe that's keeping your heart open to joy, even when it feels impossible. We've talked a lot about guilt, and then maybe part of the grieving process can include joy. We can feel immense grief and joy at the same time. That even if you allow yourself to chuckle or to smile, sit in that and notice what that feels like to give yourself some of that moment to just release, to find joy. And these are just a couple of our sources that Lauren and I collaborated with